On today's episode of the 1012 podcast, Braden Gall of the Cover 2 podcast joins us to rank all of the Big 12 football jobs. That's the 12 teams who will be in the new Big 12. Don't forget to stop by laststandhats.com for all of your head apparel needs. They've got Texas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and TCU. You need something for your head this summer or in anticipation of the upcoming football season, go to laststandhats.com now. Don't forget to use that promo code NETWORK12. It gets you 10% off your order. They've got more than hats, but folks, that's the reason that I go. Get something unique, get something you're going to love to wear. Find your new favorite hat at laststandhats.com. Don't forget that promo code is NETWORK12 for 10% off your order. laststandhats.com. Welcome to the 1012, the podcast that covers all 10 teams in the Big 12 Conference, plus BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. We are the flagship show of the 1012 Network. You can find every show in the 1012 Network at 1012network.com. That's TEN, the number 12, the word network. I'm your host, Philip Slavin. Thank you for joining us this week. Fantastic episode for you today. Very excited for you to hear thoughts from Braden Gall of Cover 2 podcast on ranking the Big 12 football jobs that they were all open today. That's the new Big 12 jobs. So the 14 teams minus Oklahoma and Texas. Before we get to that, obviously West Virginia still hunting for a new men's basketball coach. We spoke with Ethan Bach of West Virginia Sports Now about Bob Huggins, the impact of last weekend's events on West Virginia, and just kind of some general thoughts and feelings about the situation. You can find that interview on our YouTube channel. We're not going to use it for the podcast, but you can go check out our YouTube channel. 1012 Podcast is on YouTube. Please go check that out. Give it a like. Make sure you subscribe, because speaking of YouTube, next Wednesday, 8 p.m. God's time, we're doing a live show on our YouTube channel to welcome the 4 newcomers to the Big 12. July 1st is the date where we have to change our intro here on the podcast, because this will be all 14 teams in the Big 12 Conference. Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, UCF all join the Big 12, officially becoming members on July 1st. So we are going to do a live show next Wednesday to kick things off. Big 12's got a lot planned. I cannot wait to see what all they're going to do. This is our plan. I have 4 guests, 1 from each school on the show. So make sure you are subscribed to us on YouTube. Congrats to TCU. Their season is over. It's TCU baseball. I know that they didn't make it as far as they would have liked, but making it to the Final Four, very, very impressive showing this season. That is not a team that, if you had asked me back in March, who I thought would be in the College World Series, TCU would not have been a choice. For them to make it as far as they did, very impressive season. Coach Sarloos, great on TV. That man's a great interview. We got to get him on the show. Have to. NBA draft is Thursday night. Plenty of Big 12 players who should expect to hear their names. I know plenty of you will be excited from a Big 12 perspective as well as from an NBA perspective, so that's very exciting. Big 12 Media Days are coming up soon. We submitted our Big 12 preseason poll as well as all-conference team. I put that together. I sent mine in time. Congrats me. Bravo. We will break down what I submitted after Big 12 Media Days, or at least after the official poll and official all-conference team is released. I know other people are putting theirs out now. I like to wait till after the main one's out, just so that I can kind of compare and contrast. We'll have a guest on to discuss that as well. Like I said, great interview coming up. But first, speaking of great things, Oklahoma State, Kansas State getting refreshes at Home Field Apparel. Those are out now. They are incredible. Both have a kids tee, both have a quarter zip, both have joggers. Some fantastic stuff there for both Oklahoma State and Kansas State. Just these refreshes have been phenomenal. Oklahoma's and Texas's were awesome. The Cincinnati refresh was great. They just keep pumping them out. And so don't forget, Network 12. That's our promo code. That gets you 15% off your first purchase at Home Field Apparel, longest running sponsor here on the podcast and of the network. We love everything that Connor and the crew there at Home Field is doing. Go check it out. Go check out the refreshes. We're going to do something clever. We're going to do something clever with the refresh. I don't know what we're going to do. I've got some ideas popping in my head. We'll figure it out. But go to homefieldapparel.com. Check those out. Use that promo code NETWORK12 for 15% off your first purchase. All right, we got a great interview. It's a long one. It's fantastic. I've had this one in the can for a little while. I'm excited for you to hear it. So without further ado, let's get to it.
Welcome one, welcome all, and you are listening live to the one, the only Tortillas and Takes podcast.
From football to softball to track and field, tune in to get the best coverage in everything that is Texas Tech.
Not only that, but find out what unsuspecting star we get to interview and put on the hot seat.
Whether you like corn or flour, eating them or throwing them, this tortilla is for you. So listen to Tortillas and Takes.
And as always, stay wrecked, people.
Obviously, this year we will have the most unusual college football season of all time. 14-team Big 12. One time only. You better get your seats. You better get your tickets. But moving forward, this will be a 12-team conference again. The name will align with the number of members in the conference. It's been a minute. And so we did this exercise a couple of years ago, grading every Big 12 job if it was open today. And so it felt like a good time to do that again, looking forward to the 12-team conference after Oklahoma and Texas leave, because I don't really need to do this with Oklahoma and Texas because that's a silly exercise. So joining the show today is the man who helped us break this down last time. So I wanted to see how his view of the Big 12 teams has changed in light of, everything that's gone on in the last 2 years. Braden Gall, welcome back to the show, sir.
How are you, man? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. I think the house is finally healthy, so that's a positive. As I say this, recording this for a June episode drop, recording this earlier than that. But that's okay. We'll be good. How are you, sir?
I'm well, man. Great. I again appreciate you having me on. I love talking about this stuff. It's very sort of nerdy and in the weeds. Sometimes I don't think fans always understand exactly what we're talking about when we say sort of which jobs are better, which programs are better. It's not like exclusively a historical look, but it's also not a look at like 2023's roster or head coach. At least I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's sort of when we do this, that's sort of how I try to look at these programs, is sort of kind of clean the slate a little bit and just look at what the program has to offer inherently. And I love doing it. It's super. I'm glad to be here, happy to hang out, and I love doing it. So
I think the best way to kind of enter the best mindset is to say if every Big 12 football program had just booted their coach, every job is open, and they're all going after the same head coach to come and take over. That head coach has to evaluate every single program and then decide which one he would want and which order he would take those jobs. That's the mindset we want to have about this. So all things equal, it's about geography. It's about access to players. It's about resources. In this case, compared to 2 years ago into this, it's NIL opportunities and how that's set up. So there's a lot. There's a lot of things that play into this. This is not about whether your team has won more games or not. That we have this conversation all the time. Congratulations, you have more money. That doesn't mean you're going to win more. We understand that. Congratulations, you are in the state of Texas. That means you're going to win more. It doesn't always mean that. But if you are a good head coach, you should be able to have the most success at this place because of these reasons compared to the other schools. I want to start this off by just saying for everybody, because of my view of the Big 12 is, and this may sound like a little bit of a hot take, but I'm going to say it. Once Oklahoma and Texas leave, I don't think there's a single program in the Big 12 that is not capable of turning into a program that can win the Big 12 conference. I think that's how wide open this conference has become. So I don't think the distance between 1 and 12 now is the same as it was in the 12-team or even the 10-team conference with Oklahoma and Texas in it. I think the gap from 1 to 10 there was much different than 1 to 12 is going to be in the future Big 12 with its 12-team members of, I'm not going to go through the list right now. I don't want to deal with it. But I do think, and I know that sounds crazy with Kansas being the program that it was for a decade. I know that's crazy with West Virginia and the struggles they have where they are at. I know that sounds crazy with the schools that are coming in, but because of the way the Big 12 is just kind of set up, there's not a team, I believe, that is going to dominate this conference in the way that Oklahoma has. we've seen this. We're going to see teams cycle up. And so it's all going to be about whether or not you hit just right on your cycle up year. And I think every team in this conference, once they get things rolling, has the opportunity to cycle up into a Big 12 title moving forward.
100%. We could get into the specifics of this and sort of like, hey, in your national rankings, how far would number 1 from number 12 be? And I think that's a good way to look at it, because in the SEC or the Big Ten, you might argue Ohio State's number 1 in the nation. You could argue Alabama's number 1 in the nation. Pac-12, I guess it would be the future Big Ten. You could argue USC, number 1 in the nation. And then the last place team, whether that's Rutgers or Indiana or Vanderbilt, is in the 60s or 70s. So you're talking about a 60 or 70 program gap, let's call it, in the nation, in the national rankings. Whereas I think in the Big 12, it's 100% agree. It is the most balanced from top to bottom. I could argue that all 12 programs are between 30 and 55, like somewhere in there, give or take how you view certain teams. And I think a lot of that is the programs they're bringing in are sort of surging at the right time. BYU is different because BYU sort of has a very established brand. They won a national title in the 80s. They have a different kind of energy and vibe about them. But Cincinnati, of course, is on a 25-year run of elite coaches. They've got a playoff berth. Like Houston has, while they lack in some other areas, they are playing fairly good football. They also have some history and tradition. UCF, with the fans and the bounce house and everything, and the geography is sort of cycling up as well in the last 10 or 12 years. So you're sort of catching a lot of good programs that are coming in. So you're not adding bad programs. Certainly Texas and Oklahoma would be 1 and 2 on our list, and that's sort of the end of the discussion. So you're trimming the top 2 off, which means the entire program is basically even. And I completely agree. If you put Nick Saban at all 12 of these programs, he would win the Big 12 championship. It's just a question of how fast would he win the Big 12 championship at any of these given programs. And again, like, I'm looking at these and I'm not considering the current quarterback situation at XYZ school, or the front 7 depth chart or whatever. I'm just sort of looking at, if all things were equal, where would I want to go coach? And who do I think is best set up to find success based on a lot of things? You mentioned it, unlimited resources, access to players, and then a little bit of proof of concept in the background showing us sort of like, okay, we've seen them do it before, so we kind of know that they're capable.
All right. Well, after all of that, why don't we just get things started, Braden? I'm going to let you lead off. Who do you have as your number 1?
I have Oklahoma State number 1. I think the increased investment over the last 15 or 20 years from a financial standpoint has made a difference. If you look at the valuations of these programs, it's clearly 1 or 2 in terms of how much the football program is worth in a dollars and cents standpoint. They're one of the best. They have some of the highest attendance numbers in the Big 12. They have the most track record of success. Again, this is the closest proximity to really good proximity to Texas. They can get into the Dallas-Fort Worth area and recruit. It's going to be interesting to see if they have like that same problem. I mean, Oklahoma always beats them in recruiting in general, but if Oklahoma now has the SEC patch, does that affect the way Oklahoma State recruits? I think that's a huge question. That was why A&M was winning battles against Texas for so many years on the recruiting trails, because they just were carrying the SEC patch. But I still think Oklahoma State, and again, it's not, to your first point, not a very big margin. I think teams 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, I think are all pretty close together with Oklahoma State. I think they're a fringe top 25 program nationally. I don't know if they can win a national championship, but they absolutely can get into the playoff pretty routinely. And again, long-standing tradition, great fans, lots more money now than they maybe had a long time ago. Good attendance. Oklahoma State's my number 1.
When we did this last time, and I recall, I was with you of the OSU or the OU and Texas, non-OU Texas. I had OSU at the top. And I look at things for them now, and the vibes coming out, the way it feels like NIL is being run in Stillwater. And I understand all the financial stuff that's come about for Oklahoma State. It does feel like it's been a while. And like, congratulations on what you have done 10, 15 years ago, and that set up a nice foundation. But if you're not continuing to build on that, you have concerns. And so I have a little bit of concern from an Oklahoma State standpoint of like, I know they're investing and continuing to do things. They're reducing the capacity of the stadium to increase the experience, which I think is something that a lot of football programs should be looking at, as less worried about bodies if you can't get more and start focusing on quality over quantity. But I don't have them at number one. I have gone back. I would say this. I'd say 1, 2, 3 are all pretty tight. I'm not saying that they're like dropping way down. I have a hard time with 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to stick with TCU at number one. And I've gone back and forth with 2 Texas schools here and OSU pretty heavily. And one of them is TCU. To me, is a small fan base, and that's the thing that you can hold against it. They don't have a large alumni base. I get all that. We don't know how much money TCU has because they're a private institution, so they don't have to release those numbers. But I have enough friends that I'm able to talk to who are TCU alum and TCU grads and people around the TCU program that there are 2 schools in the Big 12 who don't have to release numbers who have a whole lot more money than you think that they do.
Have you seen the stonework on the stadium? No, a true story. The guy who owned Athlon Sports when I worked there, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I think he wrote a check for $40 million to like the business school. So the guy who owned Athlon Sports, Spencer Hayes, was a huge donor for TCU. He just he just had $40 million in checking.
Remember that quality over quantity we just talked about here. So again, not a massive alumni base, but it's not it's a well-off alumni base. I think you take the fact that I think they have a whole lot more money than people realize. You are centrally located in the state of Texas, right there in Fort Worth, around in the DFW area. You've got proof of concept now. One great coach can do a lot for you. 2 coaches having success is a whole nother thing. That starts to show that it might be more about the program than it is the guy in charge. Or you're just really good as a program of attracting quality candidates to come and take your head coaching job. We did it with Gary Patterson, and now, at least for year 1, we've seen it from Sonny Dykes. And so I look at TCU as a program on the rise that has money, more money than we realize, that's able to invest in football. They have been the best recruiting program in the Big 12 outside of Oklahoma and Texas for quite some time. So they already have the higher level of talent. They continue to be one of the better recruiting programs in the Big 12. I think that they are, because of the access to talent, because of their ability to get more of the talent, their ability to bring in quality assistant coaches. They're not, I don't like the OC hire, but you're still getting coordinators from the SEC to come to your school. You've shown proof of concept. I have TCU number one. I think it's one of the easiest places to win in the Big 12.
I have them at 2. They have 18 conference championships, 16 10-win seasons, 36 bowl games. That is, I think, second to only BYU historically. I think you're right. The question is sort of just they still have some time to season a little bit more for me. Like Oklahoma State has a more mature fan base, a more developed fan base. I do think TCU would be clearly number 1 in my opinion if the Big 12, when it was formed, had more TCU people on the state board than Baylor people. I think had TCU gotten into the Big 12 in 1995, I think that, or 3, whenever it was formed, and they sort of hatched the plan and all the politics took place, I think we'd be talking about a clear-cut number 1 TCU. I think Oklahoma State's just a little bit more seasoned, but I think you're right. Access to players, far more money than people realize. And I do think you're right. I think the recruiting point is valid. We say this on our show all the time. People don't realize they're one of the only teams that elevated from quote unquote G5 to Power 5 and like immediately became one of the best recruiting teams in the conference. Like Utah is not right behind Oregon and USC in recruiting. They're good, but they're not there. West Virginia hasn't done it. Like you look at the teams, that have moved, there's very few. Louisville all of a sudden wasn't recruiting at Florida State and Clemson levels. They weren't number 3 in recruiting when they elevated to the ACC. TCU is clear-cut number 1 recruiting program since joining the league, like clearly, like every single year. And to your point, 2014 and 2022 both give you some proof of concept. There were some down years, some adjustments to the big boy league. There's no question about that, but I think I've got TCU at 2. I'd be fine. I have no arguments with you putting them at 1. I think in 5 or 10 years, they're probably number 1 in my book. And I think we've seen the upside there in the state of Texas with all that money. It's just not quite as seasoned and as mature at the highest levels yet as Oklahoma State. But again, I have no argument there. I'm totally fine with TCU at number 1.
Yeah, I get the season part. I would say like I think of a head coach, like knowing that opportunity is there and that feels like they're the closest they've ever been to kind of being a perennial top 25 program. Like if I'm worth my salt and know I can recruit, like that's an easy place to push them over the edge.
Yep.
So, all right, then who do you have? Oh, you said you have TC at number 2. So
Yeah,
number
TC.
3, or number 2 for me, sorry. Number 2 for me, I actually have Baylor.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so hear me out here. Again, as we just mentioned, schools that don't have to release how much money they have, they have a whole lot more money than you actually realize. And you look at the way that Baylor has been investing in its athletic department over the last decade or so, across the board, especially in football as well. Doesn't have, yes, you're in Texas. It's not in the DFW area. You're kind of out in the middle of nowhere land. But I think you have really strong leadership at Baylor. I mean, within the athletic department, within the university. And I don't think we talk nearly enough about how important top-down aligned leadership within the university to the athletic department, AD to the coaches, how vital that is to success. I mean, go look at every program that's got tons of money, but has had success, but is all over the map and is inconsistent and can't keep coaches. Auburn, Florida, yada, yada, yada. Like that, not having that alignment will mess so many things up. And I think that is something that Baylor has there very, very well. Also, like at this point, we have 3 different head coaches who have come through and have either won a Big 12 or played for a Big 12 championship game. Matt Rule in his 3rd season at Baylor getting to the championship game against Oklahoma. We've got Dave Aranda who won one. We had he who shall not be named, obviously won one. Like at a certain point, when you have this many coaches come in and be successful, either you're just really lucky at who you're picking, or there's something there where you are going to be able to show up to Baylor and be successful. And Baylor has been good in the recruiting. They have done a good job of getting talent to Baylor, being in the state of Texas. I look at Baylor similar to TCU. The biggest difference to me is, A, you're not in DFW, so you don't have that easy access to those kids who are right there. But again, like money is not everything, and I'm going to have some people push back on the money stuff. Money's not everything.
Money's pretty important.
But it is a necessary resource to be able to bring in the level of talent to sustain success. Now, obviously, they had a dip last year, but I like Baylor's setup.
So what I think is interesting is it's not to your very first point about how money doesn't guarantee anything. Recruiting doesn't guarantee anything either. Like
No.
But no great team. Like, as I think I'm probably going to botch this because it's too early in the morning and I haven't had enough coffee yet. But just because you have great players doesn't mean you're going to be a great team. But every single great team has had great players. And so there's lots of teams that recruit really well that don't win. But every single team that's won has recruited extremely well. And so why can you recruit? Let's get to the root of why you can recruit extremely well. Certainly it takes talent, good coaching, good people in place. You talk about alignment, but it takes money. It takes fan support and interest. It takes money and it takes geography. And Baylor and TCU have a lot of that. Now, I may be giving them a little bit away here. I have Texas Tech at 3, Baylor at 4. If we had done this 15 years ago, Baylor was one of the worst Power 5 programs in the history of the sport. Mm-hmm. And that all changed. Now, I could argue that alignment you're talking about is what led to Art Briles. I think you could argue that very insular alignment with some, let's call them philosophies that I don't always agree with, that mm-hmm. can sometimes lead to the wrong people making the wrong decisions, right? Like it also leads to your point, hiring Matt Rule, who did a great Bill O'Brien impersonation to get the program back on track. And then, of course, I'm a big believer in Dave Aranda. So I've got Baylor at 4. I think there is something to be said, and partly why I have Oklahoma State at 1, and I think I'm higher, it sounds like, on Texas Tech than you are. I think there's something to be said about the big, massive sort of fan base and athletic department. There's just something about, like, Arkansas in the SEC at 78,000 fans a game. I agree with you that Baylor and TCU's best path to championships is to maybe not limit, but like make the experience extremely valuable. It's why I like podcasts instead of sports talk radio, right? Like I want to be catered to in a more communal and intense way but some of that's because the audience for a podcast is not 100 million people like the Super Bowl. And so I don't know if that analogy makes sense, but I think
No, it does.
I think there's some, like, Texas Tech has such a huge alumni base, such a huge fan base, way better track record of success than I think nationally people realize. They've hired a bunch of different coaches over the years and done well. I just think Texas Tech is undervalued nationally. I think that if they have the right guy, again, 40 bowl games, 11 championships, they need to show a little bit more. But 56, 57,000 in attendance, that's one of the best in the conference, if not the best in the conference. Moving forward, I just think there's something to be said about being a little bit bigger especially in the state of Texas. So I even understand I'm kind of contradicting myself by saying TCU, then Texas Tech, then Baylor. Baylor just, like, to me, Baylor had all the opportunities, and it just took them finding the right people, the alignment, like you talked about. I don't know if they cheated. I don't mean cheated in the traditional college football sense. I mean, like, Art Briles sort of obviously broke rules to get to where Baylor got. And I don't know if that's sort of like falsely elevated the program. The argument against that is they've had two guys that have done very, very good since then. So there's sustainability there. There's proof of concept. I just think there's something undervalued about Texas Tech's size. Lubbock is a much bigger city than people realize. Again, I think it's the third biggest alumni base in the state of Texas. Like, it's just bigger than people realize. And so I think Texas Tech kind of gets a bad rap in all of this. Multiple good coaches over multiple decades. A little bit limited in their upside, but I would argue same for Baylor and TCU and Oklahoma State. Everyone in this league is kind of limited from a national championship standpoint, but they're all playoff teams. And I think if you put Nick Saban at Texas Tech, he would crush people.
So, okay, I have Tech at fourth.
So our top four is the same then, basically.
Our top four are the same four schools, just in a varied order. I have OSU at 3, and my biggest issue with OSU at this point is I have some concern about the NIL situation, the way they had that set up, a little bit. And there is a bit, TCU's had a couple coaches now that we've had success with. Baylor's had multiple coaches now that we've had success with. OSU has been, this entire rebuild of Oklahoma State is all Mike Gundy. We need to give Les Miles his credit.
I was going to say no credit for Les Miles, huh?
We got to give Les Miles his credit for turning things around.
Who also might have cut corners to get to that point.
Les Miles has been a little while ago. If you weren't aware, Mike Gundy's been in Oklahoma State and Stillwater's the head coach since 2005. It's been a little while. And so I do think for Oklahoma State, there is it will be interesting, and I think we will be able to fairly evaluate the OSU job whenever it is that Mike Gundy leaves as to what this program can be. And I think I'm gonna give Gundy a compliment and an insult wrapped in one. This program is where it is because of what Mike Gundy has done. He's been an incredible coach. He is a very smart guy. He knows more about football than me and every guest I've ever had on here combined and more. I also think he's kind of reached his peak at Oklahoma State twice now, with some very unusual circumstances, both in 2011 and in 2021, in how he was able to achieve that. So the question becomes, is this the ceiling for OSU, is what Gundy has done, or can someone come in and take it higher? And if this is the ceiling for OSU, I have to drop them down a little bit because we've seen more from TCU. I mean, just this last year with a second coach coming in. I have some concerns about it. I just do. I just have concerns about OSU NIL.
I think the other concern is, like, was it just the one booster? Right? Like,
yeah.
Now it turns out that it's a little bit more than that, but, like, you could argue that it all got kickstarted with one guy. And this, again, I think this is what makes this conference so fascinating, is you make perfectly fine arguments. I don't even disagree with anything you're saying. If you want to argue Texas Tech at 1, Baylor at 1, I think that's fine too. I think, again, I use the Nick Saban test as sort of like one of my, it's a little reductionist, but if you cleaned all the rosters and cleaned the athletic directors and gave Nick Saban the exact same athletic director and the exact same booster structure, geography, and put Nick Saban at all 12 of these schools, where does he win the fastest? And I think Oklahoma State would be my vote. That's why I have it there. I totally see the argument for TCU. I think he would do great at Texas Tech. I think he would win at Baylor as well. So these top four for me are the clear top four. I don't have a huge concern. I don't think there's another team I would consider in the top 4. So where are they nationally, I think is interesting to remember. Sort of like when you rank quarterbacks or head coaches, it's like it's within the conference, you could be first or fourth, but nationally, if you're 25, 27, 29, and 31, well, basically you're all the same, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what I would remind people of is I think all these programs are all very good programs. They're all about the same. Varying degrees, sort of subtle differences here and there. And I think if Nick Saban was the follow-up to and I think, Gundy, it's sort of a knock that Oklahoma is like the big brother, but doesn't that sort of also explain some of the limited upside and then give credit to Mike Gundy for why they've accomplished what they have? But at the same time, whatever his record is, 2-15 against Oklahoma is not acceptable. If you're considered the best program, in America or in the conference. But, Oklahoma State is fascinating to me because they have so much good, so much to like. And Gundy's sort of reaching, I agree with you. I think like Dabo's trying to reinvent himself, frankly, by stealing TCU's coordinator. I think Gundy, part of Oklahoma State's power is that they've retained Gundy. Some of that's that he's an alumni and that they've given that the battle between him and the athletic director just has raged forever. But he's kind of got that old man on the porch yelling at clouds thing going on right now. And I don't know if that's to your point, I don't know if that's a sign of him kind of getting to the end of a very long and successful career. And then we're going to learn about Oklahoma State, or if there's another chapter for him. And when Texas and Oklahoma leave, that next chapter for Gundy will define his career. And if it could go on to include 4 championships out of 6, and if that's what happens, then I think then we kind of have our answer. But if they can't win in this conference consistently, then I think then I would side with you, and that you're right that the other programs have a little bit more, let's call it Texas staying power, right?
We'll have a long Gundy conversation at some point. This is usually a conversation, though, that's reserved for coaches that win national championships and are able to find ways to reinvent to sustain that level of success at a lower level of not reaching national championships. That point of Gundy finding ways to reinvent himself multiple times, if he does have a third reinvention, we can quibble about OAN and all the nonsense that he does and the things that personally I don't care for, but from a coaching standpoint, that's a hell of a career. Like you have to at least tip your hat and raise your glass to doing it 3 different times.
Well, as long as it doesn't affect, as long as I agree with you, I don't care about that stuff. But as long as it doesn't affect your relationship with players, which we've seen in the past. Quickly here, 2019 Wall Street Journal valuation of all of these programs. Oklahoma State number 2, $270 million. Texas Tech number 3, $244 million. Baylor's worth $105 million, so less than basically 1/3 of the value of Oklahoma State in terms of what it's worth as a football program. Number 1 will be surprising to people. Kansas State, $277 million. That's what they're worth in terms of value. Those are all right around 28, 29, 30 nationally. There's a pretty big drop off. TCU's 191. And then there's Iowa State's up there, but then the new ones are worth significantly less than the big ones are. And that's just I'd like to throw that out there because I think the 4 that we're talking about at the top, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, and Baylor's by far the least valuable of the group. And I think that's just mostly due to the fan base size and, sort of the recent success. If that makes, they don't have the 75 years of history of success or whatever.
Well, that is very interesting. All right. You're going to send me that link later. All right. So like I said, I had Texas Tech at 4th. Biggest thing, look, they have a lot of money. They have a big alumni base. They are in a much larger city. The biggest thing is always you don't realize what Texas Tech has from the city, from an alumni base, from fans who get there, from the amount of money they have. And it's all because of the major problem that Texas Tech has. It's being located all the way out there in West Texas. And Texas Tech fans get mad when I point this out. And I understand it is a frustration point for you. And I do think the point is made. Like if you can get them out to Texas Tech, there's a lot of kids who get out there and go, I want to play here. This is going to be great. The struggle remains getting them to come out to West Texas and Lubbock.
Yep.
And until you're able to pick Lubbock up and move it a couple hours closer to DFW, that's just going to remain the problem. It's always going to be a problem. It's always going to be something that's held against you. It's not fair, but it is just the reality of the situation. And again, it's not trying to say like, ha. Like it just is. Like that it just is what it is. Just like TCU's alumni base is small. You can make jokes about it all day, but it's still small. Like just like Baylor's football stadium looks like a toilet seat. Like it just does. There's nothing you can do about it. Like I can throw insults and jokes at every single program in the Big 12, but that is going to be an issue you're never going to be able to get past, even with a coach as ingrained in Texas football as you have. And that is what they have figured out to do currently to kind of combat with how do we get them to come here? Yep. And it's working. And so they found a way around that. But that's been the biggest problem, the thing to me that holds them back. They've got money. They've got fans. They've got a fun football product. West Lubbock is crazy. It is.
If Texas Tech was located in Dallas, it would be the clear-cut number one program in the conference. Like there wouldn't even be an argument. Like that's why TCU is ahead of Texas Tech in my book, is exactly what you're saying. The 6-hour radius. And if we're doing this in any other conference, like if you're doing this in the SEC, the 6-hour radius around Tuscaloosa, around Oxford, around Knoxville includes like 9 states. The 6-hour radius around Lubbock includes 1 state and a whole lot of dirt. And it just is what it is. I completely agree. It's not a knock. It's a wonderful place. I agree with you. Kids go into that facility and they're like, holy smokes. Like this is a big boy athletic department with a big boy fan base and a big boy building in a much bigger city than people realize. But you are limited to some degree. And so again, if it's located on I-35, like Baylor is even slightly in the middle of nowhere, but still closer to sort of population hubs, Texas Tech is by far the number one program in the conference with a bullet. And it's why, TCU has that sort of newness and smaller fan base. Baylor has sort of that newness and the smaller fan base. Oklahoma State's not in the state. And Texas Tech's a little bit further away. Like those are the knocks on all 4 of those programs, and they all sort of have the same upside. But the only thing that is different about Texas Tech than the other programs is geography. That's it. Otherwise they have the best of everything. Like they're in state, they have the most fans, they have the most among the most money. Otherwise they'd be number 1.
Yeah, their NIL setup is quite good, and they make sure everybody knows about it. They've done a dang good. Of course, you got a ton of alums. You're able to get a lot of money put in to play those players, which is awesome. Okay, now the top 4 out of the way, I think it starts to get a little bit interesting. Braden, who do you have at number 5?
I don't love this, but man, do they have some really historically big upside moments. They're not particularly valuable according to what the program is worth, but I think the fan base is rabid. This is a big windup here because I don't love my pick, but I have West Virginia next. They walk, talk, and act like an SEC program. They have football culture in their blood. They have a terrible recruiting base. They're out in the middle of nowhere. Cincinnati being in the league helps them, sort of builds a train stop right on the subway route around the conference. UCF being out there is going to help them because they've recruited extremely well in Florida over the years. Multiple coaches have been close to national championships, which is not something any of these other teams can say outside of TCU one time. They played in the national championship essentially in 89 and 90 with Major Harris. They were 1 game away in 07 from playing in the BCS national title game. They've hired multiple good coaches. They are very limited with their geography, but there's a lot to like about it, the rest of this. 15 conference championships historically. They have the highest winning percentage all time of any team in this league. They've won 60% of their games. No other team in the Big 12 is at that level. They've been to 39 bowls. A great, crazy crowd, but still a little bit on the small side. The reason I think West Virginia fans probably like, why were we not in the top 4? I think putting them at 5 is sort of the nod to their culture and their commitment and their fans and their program and their history, but acknowledgement of their sort of limited upside.
You have them higher than I do, and I've
you don't agree.
I don't. I have them at 8, and the reason for this is the history is awesome, and as a college football fan, I enjoy all of it. This is so much about looking forward, and I just don't know how many programs who have had the history like that, who've then had the next couple decades that West Virginia have found a resurgence back to that level? Maybe Clemson with Dabo. And Clemson had a great history of success, had weird years, and then now they're back in this, but that's because Clemson started operating like an SEC team from a financial and a structural standpoint of saying we can't really love football and everything else is whatever. Until
Helps to be located in the SEC footprint as well.
They're located in the SEC footprint. And look, I think West Virginia, I've heard the comp, I think it's accurate. West Virginia is an SEC program in the way those fan base mindset is. Like they as a fan base would fit in the SEC quite well. But they're not in the Big East anymore. They're in a Big 12 that is a more difficult conference that has shown consistently. I think recruiting is hard there. I think it is difficult to get. We talk about Cincinnati being helpful. I always wonder if UCF is also helpful as much as West Virginia has been in Florida to recruit. Playing a team in Florida on a regular basis, will that benefit them any?
Mm-hmm.
I think the potential is there for West Virginia.
They have to turn their like weird geography into a positive. Like they have to recruit DC and the Beltway and Maryland and Virginia, Florida, the way that like Texas Tech cannot, right? Like they have to turn their weird recruit Ohio like crazy. They just have to recruit areas, and that's where playing Cincinnati and UCF will help them. So I think actually I think you could argue West Virginia benefits more. So if UCF and Houston were not coming in, or UCF and Cincinnati were not coming in, I think to your point about the trajectory of the program being downward would be very real. I think making sure that because they lived off of Florida recruiting. Rich Rodriguez lived off of Florida recruiting. And I think Pat White was from lower Alabama near the panhandle of Florida. Like they playing games in Houston and Cincinnati and UCF, I think helps West Virginia more than any other program in the conference, honestly.
Yeah, no, West Virginia has been the biggest beneficiary of the 4 schools incoming.
Yep, bingo.
I think being in the Big 12, while it was necessary for West Virginia to be in the conference to basically save their program, I also think it capped them. Even with the additions in the new schools, I still think it capped West Virginia. And I still think this raises the cap some for them, but not enough. And so, again, I still think, I said at the start of this, every school in this conference can win the Big 12. I'm just curious with West Virginia because we have not seen any sort of consistency from them since they joined the conference. Will Cincinnati and UCF's addition be enough to help them get there? I don't know. I would like for it to because I think that fan base is a ton of fun, and I would love to see them rowdy and excited.
You've got them at 8. I would argue the next 4 on my list, which West Virginia is at the top of with 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 are about the same. Honestly, I know this sounds like a cop out, but I don't really think there's a big difference there. I think you could also argue my next 6 are not that different, 5 through 10. I had a tough time picking 11 and 12, but I do think that there's 2 that are kind of beneath the rest. But I mean, if 5 through 10 are very, very close. Actually, I might say 5 through 9 are very, very close, in my opinion. So I don't have a problem with West Virginia being lower. I also think if we do this 5-10 years ago, West Virginia could be number 1. So it's about the new landscape of college football, how it's affecting West Virginia. So I think it's like 2 steps back and then 1 step forward is kind of how it feels for West Virginia over the last 10 years.
Okay, so number 5, you mentioned the shocking team at number 1 as far as evaluations of how much they are valued, about how much they are worth. I have Kansas State number 5, which I can't believe I'm saying because if I recall correctly, last time I did this, we both had Kansas State in the bottom 4. As I have familiarized myself more with the program, their biggest issue is always going to remain the fact that they are not in a good recruiting spot. There's just not the states that surround you, the 6-hour radius that surrounds you is not chock full of talent. There's a good amount of talent in St. Louis and in Missouri, and if you could tap into that more, that'd be great. But you're battling Missouri, you're battling Illinois, you're battling the Big Ten and the SEC for that talent, and they're just not winning enough. The state of Kansas doesn't produce a ton, and even then, it's hard to keep all those guys in. Although I do think Kansas State is doing a better job as of late with Kleiman. But there's something about Kansas State to me that kind of in a Wisconsin way, like this program knows who they are.
Yep. There's a lot of value in that.
They've figured out new ways to remain who they were, right? Because used to it was all built through JUCO. And they've shifted away. They're not just building programs through the junior colleges anymore, but that still feels the same, even though tactics and how to get there vary. And even with slight changes to the offense, I just like Kansas State feels like the Wisconsin of the Big 12. And I mean that absolutely as a compliment.
Yeah.
Because it is a program that feels different, that likes to be different, that succeeds at being different and knows who they are. And despite the ever-changing landscape of college football, as you see the academy schools who are all having to shift away from the way they like to do things, Kansas State, even Wisconsin is going with freaking Phil Longo. Who
Yep.
I don't know what that's going to look like. Kansas State remains the staple. And so am I going to win a national championship in football at Kansas State? No. But I have had this conversation on the show many times that if that's your evaluation of a successful program, is it can it win a national championship? That's great. There are schools that do that. I would be the kind of person who would be perfectly happy to be the head coach at Kentucky, win 9 games a year, have my job forever, and make bukus and bukus of money.
It makes $7 million.
That's the best job in college football to me.
How far away do you have Iowa State from Kansas State? Because I feel like you cannot have a conversation about Kansas State without packaging it with Iowa State, right?
Yeah, because I think I promise that we're not looking at each other's homework. Like 5, 6, 7, 8. Like I don't love West Virginia. They're at the bottom there, but 5, 6, 7 at least are pretty close to me. I have Iowa State there at number 7.
I have Iowa State at 7 as well.
Okay.
I have Kansas State. I have Kansas State and Iowa State sort of inextricably linked. Like they're just together to me, for a couple of different reasons. The recruiting bases are very similar. They are technically the 2 losingest programs in the history of this conference, all 12 teams, 44.9% historically. Kansas State has certainly a little bit more upside, 10 win seasons, which Iowa State is one of only 3 Power 5 teams to never have. So there's not as much proof of concept for Iowa State. I think Iowa State has a significantly undervalued fan base. I think it is the most underrated fan base in maybe all of college football. I think Jack Trice Stadium is phenomenal. I think it's an unbelievable place to watch a game. But it has not yet truly translated. I think we're finally finding a guy that wants to stick around and build it for real, seeing what that actually looks like, which is sort of their version of Bill Snyder and now Chris Kleiman. I think they're just basically the same to me. I think the fans at Iowa State are slightly like a little bit more passionate. 57,000, which is the number one most attended team. If people don't realize that, Iowa State is number 1 in attendance in the new Big 12. Although BYU might push that, they might push past them eventually. Again, I could be convinced that I probably have. So I have Kansas State at 8, but again, I think 5 through 8 is about the same. I think Iowa State and Kansas State, the established, mature athletic departments, budgets, history, fan bases, I think are more valuable and better than the new guys in the conference, which probably gives you a hint of where I have the new guys ranked. I think that maturity is valuable. I just think playing big boy football for 100 years is different than not. And I think there's always an adjustment. We saw TCU dominate the Mountain West and then have to make an adjustment coming up. So I think Iowa State and Kansas State, I think BYU is different, but I think Iowa State and Kansas State are basically the same. I would give the slight nod to Iowa State based on fan base. But I think you could also give the nod to Kansas State because of actual track record. Like they've done it before. Much like the Mike Gundy argument, though, how much of that was just one guy? Well, now we're seeing it again. They've got another conference championship out of their next coach. So they also have hired Ron Prince. So there's that. But nobody's immune to making.
We all make mistakes.
Nobody's immune to making bad decisions. Like that's college football. I mean, Look at the University of Texas. So I'd be interested to see who your other team is here, because I've got West Virginia 5, Iowa State 7, Kansas State 8. I'd like to know who else you have in this mix here.
And so I have Kansas State 5, Iowa State 7, and West Virginia 8. I think we're going to differ here based off the comment you just made. I actually have BYU at 6.
I have BYU at 6.
Oh.
So the reason that BYU is different than Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF is that it's different.
It's a national brand across with fans across it is the only national brand in the Big 12 conference. Like,
Yep.
we could talk about Cincinnati's success, we could talk about UCF's success, we could talk about Houston, whatever. BYU, to me, was the most important add for the Big 12 as a conference from a branding standpoint that Brett Yormark is focused on, than of any of the schools that they have added.
No team in the Big 12 has been to more. And I don't care about bowl games traditionally. I'm just sort of lining up all the data here to sort of prove your point. No team in the Big 12 has been to more bowls ever, 40 bowl games. No team has more 10-win seasons in this conference than BYU, 18. No team has more conference championships than BYU, 23 conference championships. And no team has a higher attendance than BYU last year, 59,000 strong. They are limited because of their brand in some ways, because of why that brand and how that brand has been built. But you talk about grown adult men playing grown adult football, literally with families. That they're just so different from everybody else in college football. And I think that gives them a very high floor in the Big 12, in my opinion. It doesn't mean they're going to win championships, but it gives them a really high floor. They schedule extremely hard. They play really big games with big teams, and they play well in those games pretty consistently, decade over decade over decade. And so I think the upside for BYU is Big 12 championships, but I think the floor is like they're an upper half of this conference program. Like there's like the floor for Kansas, we've seen it. The floor for Houston with that fan base is pretty low, but I think the floor for BYU is pretty high. I think it might be one of the highest floors of any team in this conference.
I think we can just talk about this year. Like, I think they're the most prepared to enter the Big 12 and not see the biggest 1 year dip of the 4 schools incoming. I mean, this is a program that's used to playing 6 or more Power 5 teams on their schedule every year.
Bingo.
Yes, most from the Pac-12. We can make jokes about that, whatever you want. But like,
played Baylor and Arkansas.
They're used to playing multiple names, not one, not two, like half their schedule or more against that caliber of opponent on a regular basis. They're going to be the most prepared to come in. They are similar to what the Catholics are to Notre Dame, a ready-built, immediately get in their recruiting base. They have a similar situation at BYU to grab players from around the country. I think they're well coached, but we can set that aside. I just like, this is a program that has had success. Everybody knows who BYU is. There's no like, oh, I wonder what does that look? No, it's BYU. People know what BYU is. And you have alumni everywhere. I mean, we're talking about Big 12 Mexico, and one of the conversations I've seen a lot is like, send BYU down there, because you know whose fan base is going to show up and be ready to go? BYU. Because guess what? Every time they go to a Vegas bowl game, those fans show up. They don't care. They're ready to go. Like, this is a I'm not sure that they're like, this is a program whose ceiling isn't as high as the other teams we've mentioned. Like, they're already pretty much, I think, close to what their ceiling is. They can win more games by having more resources, of course. But I don't think that their fan base is going to suddenly like balloon. I don't think that program is going to suddenly balloon up to like second or first in the Big 12. I don't think it's going to. I think it's still going to have issues in recruiting that you have being at BYU and having systemic things there that you just have to deal with rules that going to BYU.
See, I agree with you on that point. I think what would be interesting, much like West Virginia with Cincinnati and UCF, if Colorado and Utah and Arizona schools are brought into the Big 12, that will help BYU in a big way. That's where you add some upside to BYU. It adds competition, but it adds upside, because then you are like their brand is. I agree with you. They're kind of all of these teams can go 12-0 or 11-1 in the conference and win the conference championship and get into the playoff. Let's be clear about that. BYU is one of them. But I think your point about sort of they are what they are, it's because they're so mature as a program, both like as a program long term, but literally the humans that play the football, and they're just different.
They go off for 2 years
to
a mission and then come back and play football, and you forget it's like, that's not a bunch of 18-year-old freshmen out the field.
They're 23-year-old grown men who are married with children, and it's just different. But if they have games in Arizona in conference, the Holy War is a battle in conference. Colorado is a battle in conference. I think that it's sort of like brings in the fold a little bit more the geography of where they're located, because right now they're kind of the outlier. They can recruit those states better than everybody else, and they have to do that the way West Virginia has to recruit Maryland and DC and Virginia, because they have this weird geographic location. That's what BYU is doing right now. But if all of a sudden there's a bunch of other Big 12 programs around them, that adds value to them. So that's just an angle to think about, because like if we're going to talk about UCF benefiting West Virginia and Cincinnati, sort of connecting the conference together a little bit more, that's why Brett Yormark wants all those teams, is that they are great recruiting bases, they're good brands, and they sort of tie it all together with BYU.
All right. We are through our top 8. We've got 4 left to go, Braden. So number 9, who do you have?
I want you to go first because I think it's pretty clear who number 9 is.
Okay. I have Kansas.
Oh, okay. It's not as clear.
If you probably thought I was going to mention the team down in Texas that we have not mentioned yet.
No, I have UCF clearly at number 9. Much bigger fan base. The only dog in the only Florida school. Like, I know it's weird being a conference going from Orlando to Provo. That's weird. I get it. But UCF has a lot of advantages. They've built up extremely quickly. They have a much rowdier fan base and very low academic standards. And they can get anybody they want in, and they can dominate Florida recruiting in the Big 12. I think UCF has the most upside of any of the new teams, but I think there's going to be some growing pains. So I have them next. I don't know what to do with Kansas, frankly. Like I'm fine with Kansas being at 9. I know from a value standpoint, Kansas is one of the more valuable programs in this conference, but there's sort of less of everything with Kansas. There's less winning. There's less proof of concept. There's fewer fans. There's less success. There's less money that's diverted from basketball. Like there's just less. And I love Jalen Daniels. I love Lance Leipold. I think they're doing miracles. The old Todd Reesing teams were great. But I have UCF and Houston ahead of Kansas because I just can't figure out what to do with Kansas. I do like the maturity of the Big 12 brand and everything, but at the same time, they haven't done a whole lot with it. So, and they don't have the same fans as like Kansas State or Iowa State or BYU even. So I make your case for Kansas because I'm having a tough time with them.
I think for Kansas, here's the deal. The fan base angle, I think they're a sleeping giant because we see what they can do for basketball. Now, I don't think football is never going to reach winning national championships like men's basketball does. But I think this is a fan base who has been so hungry for success in football that, and casual fans of Kansas who are so hungry for success in football that if they start getting successful, and I mean bowl games on a regular basis, pulling off upsets, getting to, bless them, 8-9 wins, like I think that fan base is ready to explode, support that team, be big and rowdy. I do. Look, there are similar limitations to Kansas State from a recruiting standpoint, and I actually think more so than Kansas State because Kansas State's had the proof of concept. They know what they want. They're able to get the players, and Kansas struggles on that front. But Kansas also has money.
Yeah,
they are utilizing NIL, and I think that is a team that I think Kansas is the closest to TCU and best able to utilize the transfer portal. TCU does a great job of come on home Texas players who didn't succeed other places and want to come back to the state of Texas. And I think Kansas is serving as a very good place and will continue to do of like, look, we're never going to get a bunch of guys at a high school who are just going to be studs. But you had success. You can come here to a Power 5 level. We have the NIL to get you here. I think Kansas has more potential, and I think they have barely scratched the surface this last couple seasons.
I'd have 2 questions for you. Number one, what is the difference between TCU and UCF? Like truly, what's the difference? That'd be number one. And number two, I think I would disagree with how much emphasis you're putting on NIL. I think it's very transient and it's going to change very quickly if you get the right people in place. And I think eventually there'll be legislation so that NIL is largely equal. At least the structure of it all. I think right now we're in a point in college football where some teams have figured it out and some teams haven't. We are going to reach a point where everyone's figured it out, and then it is about your resources. How much passion and money and commitment do your fans and boosters have to pour money into that NIL? Because at some point the structure of the NIL will all be identical. Like it'll be managed by the NCAA or Congress.
Sure.
God bless us all. If either one of those two are in charge of it, probably by the conference and the conferences, or maybe a singular office that manages football. Who knows? I don't know. I think eventually NIL is going to be.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I think eventually NIL is going to be all the same, and then it's going to be, well, how big is your fan base, and how much money are they willing to put into it? Because I think you're right. The structure right now and how people are executing NIL is very different. Eventually, that's going to level set, and across the board, it's all going to be equal. So I haven't taken that into as much account right now, and that's okay. I don't have a problem with it. That's my argument for not using it as an important factor, because I think it's going to level out at some point. But UCF and TCU, like, what's the difference?
UCF TCU question. UCF has had a ton of success. That is a rowdy fan base. You are located in Florida. You're the only Big 12 school in Florida. That program is still so new. And I understand they're cranking students out like crazy. But I also kind of wonder, like, you don't have the older alumni with the deep pockets who, like, and I'm not saying they don't have money. There is something about having an established older alumni, because
No, I agree.
that fan base is young.
Yep.
And young people ain't spending a bunch of money investing into college athletics on a real scale. Yeah, they're going to buy tickets, they're going to buy shirts, and they're going to be on social media, and all that's awesome. That is good for that program. It's helping to build that program up. But they don't have the old, established, wealthy alumni that all these old Texas schools do that have been playing football for 50, 60, 100 years.
I completely agree with your answer there. But the profile entering the Big 12 is very similar other than that. And that's a big difference. You're right. It's absolutely a huge difference. But
here's the other question. I think we're going to have to we need to see what UCF does when they get to the Big 12. Do they, similar to what TCU did when they arrived at the Big 12 and immediately improved their recruiting up to a Big 12 caliber, is UCF able to replicate that as well? Because I still think that TCU had a better reputation when they joined the Big 12 because of the length of time that they had the success with Gary Patterson versus what UCF is having in the state of Florida entering into the Big 12 now. I also think you entered the Big 12 at a different time.
I think
when OU entered.
Yeah, I think UCF under Scott Frost and then for 1 year under Josh Heupel, they were the number one recruiting team in the AAC. They should be the number one recruiting team in the AAC every year.
They should be.
That, frankly, was the knock on Heupel's last couple of years there. I think you can't look at UCF recruiting in the Big 12 and say, are they beating Florida State, Florida, and Miami for players? Like, no. Maybe you get one, but like that's not where you benchmark them. It's, do you, like Cincinnati and Ohio, can you take the best of the rest after Ohio State picks their players?
It's not who are they beating. It's what is your overall quality of class period versus the other Big 12 schools.
And I would take the second tier athlete. They're going to win a lot of second tier battles in Florida because they're a Big 12 school. They're already doing it as an AAC school. I think they're going to win a lot of second tier battles in the state of Florida for recruits, that because the Big 12 offers them a significantly bigger stage and a bigger opportunity at more success and more money, they are going to win a ton of battles. And I would take second tier, low 4 stars, high 3 stars out of the state of Florida than West Virginia's recruiting base, than Kansas State, Iowa State recruiting base, maybe even Oklahoma State recruiting. Like, I would take certainly Houston or Cincinnati, BYU, and Cincinnati. I think their recruiting base, their 6-hour radius around Orlando, even on a second tier level behind, let's say, the big boys, Florida State, Miami, even Georgia and Alabama, I would take that second tier recruiting base in Florida for UCF could still be on par with TCU, because TCU, let's be very clear, is not winning recruiting battles against Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas A&M. They're not. And LSU. They're not winning those battles. So they're taking second-tier players out of Texas. And I would say the second-tier players out of Florida are equally as good as the second-tier players out of Texas. So I think the reason I have them at 9 is your exact point about their newness and their youth and their lack of sort of old money. That's why I have them at 9. But in 20 years, they could be number 2 like TCU.
Oh, look, if we do this again in 2 or 3 years, UCF has the highest ceiling of the 4 coming in.
Yeah, that's good.
They have the most capacity for growth. They have the most opportunity to be better and better. But like UCF, like BYU is most prepared to enter in and have success right away. I almost think UCF is the team. If you ask me which of the 4 teams is going to be the first one to win a Big 12 title, I'll tell you it's UCF.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. BYU's pretty well prepared, but I think UCF. It's ironically, of course, Cincinnati's the only one who's actually been anywhere and accomplished anything. Houston, I think, and we can move on to Houston. I have Houston at 10. I have them right there with UCF, but I think there's just a major fan base issue there. They're just significantly smaller. I know they've got some really deep pocket donors there, but I think my issue with and they've got some track record of success. They got a great recruiting base. For some reason, it's just the fan base is that's the thing that holds them back. It's just not as large and as big as I think anyone realizes.
When they're really good, the fan base is there. When they're not good, the fans are not.
Yeah.
And Houston fans say that as some explanation of well, no, it's when we're good. Yeah, but when Iowa State sucks, the stadium's full.
Yeah, they have they have less than half as many people than Iowa State in their stadium. When they're good, when they're great, they have half as many fans as Iowa State.
And so that fan base thing, Houston fans get mad about it, but it's it's a real thing. It is. And so
But they can absolutely still win Big 12 championships.
Yes. Oh, of course. Everyone can.
Yep.
Okay, so you've got Houston 10. You had Kansas at 11.
I have Kansas at 11, and I held my nose and took a shower and put Cincinnati at 12.
So did I. This is why Luke Fickell left.
Well, I think it's why all of them have left. There's we're Mark D'Antonio, Brian Kelly, Butch Jones, a lot of really good coaches at Cincinnati who won a lot. I'm not saying Butch Jones is a great coach. He was a good coach at Cincinnati. But those are some really historically, generationally good coaches. And I think I've been to that stadium. I think they've done a really good job of building it. They have, unfortunately, Cincinnati has sort of the least of everything. Although the recruiting base, I think, is still pretty interesting. I think it's better than people think. But now you're recruiting against Kentucky a lot as well for those second-tier players. You know that Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State are going to take the players they want out of Ohio. You have sort of a unique path into the South a little bit more. You could get into Kentucky and Tennessee and Missouri and Arkansas and recruit, but being in Texas is going to help them. They recruit Florida very well, but their fan base is fairly small. Their brand is fairly small. It's been elevated the last couple of years with Fickell, but they sort of have the least of everything. They don't have the established old money brand. They don't have the big fan base. They've kind of maximized everything that they are, I think, under Luke Fickell. And I think moving into the Big 12 will be a major adjustment for Cincinnati.
Yes. I mean, look, I've heard it said by multiple people, Fickell did not want to join the Big 12. He wanted to stay. It's why he took the Wisconsin job. He wasn't happy with the NIL situation. I am worried about Cincinnati in year one. I am worried about Cincinnati, period. I think they will win games. And of course, we've seen what they can do. Can they win a Big 12 title at some point? Yes, they can. But yeah, they're at 12. And I hate it because I'm excited to have Cincinnati in the Big 12, but yeah, I think they're 12.
It's a perfect fit for what they're trying to accomplish. They want to stretch out almost nationally. They wanted good football programs with good brands and some good success mixed together, but also let's bring West Virginia closer into the fold with Cincinnati. Again, I think that's a value. That's why I think Memphis is a really good target for them, because it kind of just fits and kind of continues to sort of slowly spread them into the Southeast, which I think is smart. There's a couple other programs that they could look at to go that direction as well. It's why they're looking at the big schools from the Pac-12. It's why Boise State is a really great fit as well. There's space to grab good programs, but they're not elite. Cincinnati is in the 50s. I mean, they've had really great coaches and still have they all leave to go other places. So I think there's a reason that happens.
Braden, you have been awesome. I really appreciate your time today. Do me a favor. There's so much good stuff you do. Plug everything, man. Plug it all.
Cover 2 podcast is our national college football show. It's from Athlon Sports. Magazines are coming out now, so you can pre-order them now at athlonsports.com. You can get to me at Braden Gall. Occasionally hear me on ESPN Radio, Feinbaum, or whatever. I kind of do some fill-in work for them. But really just if you want to talk college football, at Braden Gall on Twitter. It is my drug of choice. I'm going down with the ship. So the podcast for Athlon, the magazine, and then the Twitter account. I've got a bunch of stuff that's Nashville based. I got an SEC show as well, but again, just you want to interact. I'm always on. I'm always lurking on Twitter. I don't tweet as much anymore because it's while it's still my drug of choice, I need to maintain some sanity. But I'm always there reading, having conversations with big time college football fans. And Steven, my co-host on the Cover 2 podcast, Stephen Lassen, and I say this all the time. Could not be more excited about the new Big 12 and the balance that it creates, the parity that exists in this league, the growth of all the schools that are coming in. I think they've done a really good job of putting together a football crazy conference the best way they possibly could have after losing the two big premier brands. And while the rebound is not one of the best conferences in college football, it will be one of the most interesting conferences in college football. And I think that's good enough for me. I just want to watch really good football games and drama, and that's why I love the sport. And I think the Big 12 is going to deliver that in spades over the next few decades.
Cover 2 is a great show. Everybody go check it out. We enjoy having Steven on the show as well. Braden, always a pleasure, man. Let's not wait 2 years next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, dude. Good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.